calendars. The first time I read anybody in theoretical physics, I was 13 years old. I was a freshman in high school. It was Friedrich Capra. He wrote this book called The Turning Point that I was very excited about because I was a dancer. And so I was like, oh, obviously, no, it was about like how the whole thing happens. It was so amazing. I totally forgot that. Anyway, so I got very into physics and AI, machine learning, symbology. I have a really good friend from the time we were little babies, and she's always like, "You're so deep." And I really am. I have been so curious my whole life. So I had a whole bunch of unfortunate events, and I also unfortunately have a whole lot of ethics. And what I wanted to bring forward after I learned from the unfortunateness was yoga. And I'm a white lady. Putting my name on something, that is not going to be called yoga. That would be so antithetical to the nature of Taoism, to the nature of me, and to this process I was in during the pandemic. I had cancer all by myself. I'm going to have memories now, if anybody is curious. I am doing great. This is good. Hi, Darla. There's the kitty. Hi. So I really spent a lot of time during the pandemic contemplating, um, even though I was having cancer and healing a stroke, like how the media was globally, because I was present on the ground for the first Matrix, Web 1.0. I was very early at Yahoo. I have to get my cat a treat. I was very early at Yahoo, and I was very early in e-commerce. And creating our own net and seeding data, taking money for it, doing so without, there was no nomenclature. We didn't have standard anything. And I was very good at it. Some of my friends from Carnegie Mellon were like, you should talk to these people. They think like you. And I was like, nobody thinks like me. They really do think like me. David and Jerry. If I had not worked at Yahoo, I wouldn't have survived my stroke when I had my stroke in 2019. There are three main, very important brain things the brain does. The first, very most important brain thing that brain does is keep us breathing, heart breathing, food digesting, skin skinning, anything that has to be auto magic that we don't have control over. Then the other two things the brain has to do is make the first decision about which part of it is going to carry the burden, the load of the motor aspect of sensory motor. Everybody's going to take my word at all of this neuroscience. So I had my stroke, and my medulla oblongata did not fail. So that meant the part that was going to keep my body breathing and like my skin skinning and all that, even if I couldn't tell that it was all really happening, I knew it was really happening. But the which other part carries the load? The axes in the plane that those two parts are on are at a 90-degree angle to each other. They're fully opposed, fully opposed. I know that. I also know how media operates. I also know how power works. And I know a little thing about what tissue is like when it's alive, because that's all I've been studying my whole life, is life. I declared that I wanted to be a geneticist in middle school. I've been contemplating um, punnet, not eugenics, but punnet. Like how would you game out your corn? Like that must have been a really cool process people went through. I contemplate data, and my mouth is getting dry. Yes, Oh my goodness, little co-regulator. My epigenetics interest is my master's degree. So I went to Carnegie Mellon and realized within a minute that what I was learning was epigenetics, but it was presented as media and philosophy and contemplating power structures. And I chose post-World War II war. I mean, well, the philosophers were mostly post-war as well. But I was very curious as to how like things like mm, my mouth is dry. I went to the schooling that I did because I read a book about how the English working class came out of the Industrial Revolution. And I was like, that's a whole category of human. I've been calling us categories of human. Very, very. Anyway, however I solved my stroke, I was also like rebuilding the life of me. And so I wanted to bring all this stuff forward because I resolved my stroke by completing physics three-body problem in my body. That is what this practice is. This is called Nadon. Excuse, please. It's up, pink. It's called Nadon, Taoist inner alchemy. This is alchemy that predates cuneiform writing. This is the alchemy that became Chinese writing. And then that became the Bagua. And then that became the martial arts and the I Ching. But we did not get Taoism as an idea until China experienced a certain kind of political structure that we are sliding into right now in the US. So Taoism is a politic about ethos. And the way the medicine is taught is in alignment with the philosophy I learned in grad school, which is don't mess with a whole ass human. Understand that anything you put in writing can and will guide a mind. How are you guiding the mind? So, like, the whole question in e-commerce for me was about guiding and blah, blah, blah. And then I didn't want to call the somatics yoga. So I came up with, I'm going to start bringing up some pictures on whatever that is, the YouTube. I started calling it extraordinary yin because yin is yin, extraordinary is extraordinary. None of that is yoga, even if it all is, because this is a new form. It's fully a martial art, but it's based on physics, like actual physics. Like me knowing that Taoist alchemy operates through thermodynamics and not wanting to add fire to the fact that I was healing cancer, living, having a stroke. I mean, that's a lot to navigate. One does not navigate that looking for the sun. One navigates that as low to the ground as possible because it's easier for a body that has two arms and two legs to slither and slide and roll around than it is for a body that has two arms, two legs, and can't move half the body to regulate into some kind of preferred state. I mean, it is so, anyway, I know all the those guys with the um I'm just literally like trying to like see how I'm centering here and how I want to go into this. I'm trained in polyvagal theory. I have trained with the American Psychiatric Association. I've trained with medical doctors. I have enough credentials and lived like kind of work experience that I can get into rooms. However, for the yoga people, I do not have a little piece of paper from the yoga journal saying that I took your little class on trauma. So, can you imagine trying to find a job as a neuroscientist who actually resolved enough trauma to experience growth all by yourself? And to be told I don't know about trauma. It's been very bizarre. I think I've been also like really aware. So what we're looking at right now, if you're on YouTube, is from nothing to everything, counting Dow or like counting down. So my primary, the stroke was just get the body to through protect. Remember, I have feet. I had but the cancer was I went in already done. I went in as though I was not going to come out because 6 months of radiation, 30 rounds of chemotherapy unattended is objectively dangerous. Objectively. I could have had a fever. I could have slipped. I could have had an infection. I was unable to perceive much about my own body. So I had people coming to help me, of course, and I had agreements with my landlords so that they could come in if like something or whatever. But I was on my own, and the radiation people wanted to know why my skin looked so good. And I was like, because I do yoga. I'm living on interest. I was also living on interest from a long time, getting strung up by my toes by very, very scary looking people doing other objectively exciting things and not knowing at all how the engineering works. Why would I care? If I'm going to put my body in risk and there's mechanics involved and somebody else is running the mechanics, that's their job. And also, they should just know what they're doing. This is me. I like it to be auto magic. So there are two pictures of me in suspension in the totality of all of this. And I did give author credit to my former partner on this book. Just that way, any intellectual property that comes out. I hadn't talked to him in years, years. And there was a point in this process where I was like, maybe I am like really not understanding physics. And I called him and he was like, no, you're really understanding. And I was like, it is our model of consent that I hold. We used to teach people how to do no harm and how to have a conversation. The whole reason I started teaching in that space is I would go to classes and there would be a really skinny girl. Okay, I'm not skinny and I'm very flexible, but whatever. And she would not talk. And I was just like, pretty sure that whoever is being the house plant is part of the equation of whatever's going on. And so that's how that started. I've helped change laws. I helped change this last DSM, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. You don't like how your doctor labels you? I've been working on that shit for a long time. However, then I had cancer and a stroke, not in that order. So the way that you get through for if you're me, trust the math, skip anything solid. And what I mean by skip anything solid is, especially in isolation cognitively, for years watching a global news cycle that was only feeding me tragedy, and then feeding me anger that people might actually continue to behave as though any of that mattered. That was a genetic event for our species. Okay, that was planetary. That wasn't global. The AIDS crisis in the 80s was global. This was planetary. And it was planetary because of our technology and very much because I don't know who's teaching people are doing the media theory, but y'all, so the essence of media theory is that anything you're looking at is inherently, potentially not to be quite believed right away. Any surface, all of them. And what that means from a Taoist perspective is the Tao that can be named is not the Tao. Trust the math, skip anything solid. The philosophy term is Wu Wei. I don't know what that means, okay? I really don't. But what I do know is there are times when it is better to be a warrior, and there are times when it is correct to be an initiate. And I had no choice, my friends. I really didn't. This part is a little bit magical, so we're just going to go with it. I was having a stroke. This is a factual thing that occurred in my experience. I cannot tell you whether or not it was true, but here's her picture. Her name is Ming Po. I had no idea she exists in Chinese cosmology. Brain was failing. Events occurred. Like I saw the angels. I saw my heart chakra, which was so cool because I don't usually see things inside. It opened up so beautifully, and I was like, yay. If I'm going to be paralyzed, like totally, this is the way to be brought into that. And the three whatevers that I've never been able to understand my whole life of the seven who have been with me said, you are being initiated into a feminine wisdom stream, right? And I said, excuse me, I cannot be initiated into non-dualism. There's nothing to be separated from, right? And then I had a moment of, have I not done Tao right? Have I not been contemplating non-dualism? Am I having that weird, no, actually, yeah, that was that. I was like, so I figured it was Hecate and I was going to get to have menopause. And I was like, that would be really fun. Paralyzed and menopause. Okay. Like that's what we have to do. I had money because my mother had died. Truly without that, I would not have survived either. This was a very expensive problem to solve. And the approach I took with the stroke was it was an experience of fracture, dissociation, and disillusion, like dissolving. I have a lot of dissociation in my lived experience just from being neurodivergent, chronic pain, whatever, behaviors that we do because our little ones, I have never been so profoundly aware of how like dangerous the lack of cognitive function I had was. I could not read a paragraph. I couldn't perceive it. I was doing identity verification on the blockchain, international compliance, and I couldn't add two cells in an Excel spreadsheet. I couldn't feel my feet, could not feel my tailbone. Um, and so the therapy for that ended up being vestibulocochlear. This is really important as to what I've now been perceiving and this new discovery in dark matter, because they're looking at uh, frozen sound, but they're measuring it with light. This is what they're not getting anyway. It was vestibulocochlear. She said something like, you just need to operate as though blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, I totally know how to do that. Now it's an injury. And then, of course, neuroscience was like, oh, you're a middle-aged woman, you have anxiety, and you need to go into behavior therapy. And I was like, thank you, goodbye. I am my own way out. Yeah. And so I ended up having to go to my parents' hometown because I was like, I was gone. And the psychic event was net zero, full collapse. And that has to do with some past history with the homeowners company. He was the one of the planet's first, were there 15 of them, I think, in the 90s, who determined how the cables would be laid on our planet. And they used um, Buckminster Fuller logic. And then I was trained in Buckminster Fuller logic in media by the inventor of the CD-ROM, who's a protege of Timothy Leary's. So there was a very particular kind of group that took me in. You know some of them. One of them is now the director of the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies. One of them used to be named Alexander Shulgin. They called him Sasha. He wrote some books. He worked for Merck. And, part of that whole experience was me learning about ethics. So I remember, oh, this is fun. We're going from nothing. I remember Brian Behlendorf, who invented the Apache web server, was doing some of the first open source for profit on the internet. Is I cannot tell you how much these men's partners loved me because we would go to a rave, okay, and like the rave would be raving, and I would ask a question, just sit there. I had no idea. I don't do any math. Have you ever heard a compound complex problem solver doing compound complex problem solving on a compound complex compound? Yes, that's truly how it goes. So anyway, so cancer, whatever. Most important thing probably is that when I was with those guys, I was building Yahoo, but I also trained with this guy, Edward Tufte, um, because I was doing some of the world's first UX at the point of money exchange. Okay. There's a lot of sub stuff that you have to put under that. So all the different bank accounts are okay with having information shared. Yeah. And none of that's standard. And everybody knows that Katie is not going to let anything blow up. Because I am the queen of the workaround. I just remembered today they used to call me the goddess of ontology. So, as it turns out, Katie's physics has absolutely zero thermodynamics. None. Verified today, based on gravity and water, not light. And that's because I can't see anything in my head. And then I had to like survive stroke, and I was navigating through the back of my retina my whole life. This is gravity. Okay. It is a human on the land of Earth. They are alive. Yeah. And they are sentient. And the human's tissue is also being contemplated as alive. Physics. After World War II, you had an opportunity to ask a really big question about something, did you not? Yeah. No, not consequence, matter. They do not contemplate sentience in their matter. That is absurd. Truly. Why do you think you have a waveform collapse? It's going through a human. And now physics believes, because I see enough of it online, there's evidence everywhere, even from these dark matter people, they believe that looking at a simulation, that's the simulation, by the way. We don't live in a simulation. We create them through media. And then we name them real. And if I believed any of that, I would have thought I should have just regulated my vagus nerve as I was paralyzed and couldn't finish a sentence. TF. Anyway, There are a few ways to look at a body once it's whole, on the ground and alive. I love the way that TCM does because it's a map and I don't have to know directions. It's the same on both sides. Okay, it works in any direction and it's always the same because this is a map to skin. Okay, Chinese medicine contemplates invasion at the level of skin. So the way that the alchemy operates, if you do math and the third D, which I don't do, is this is skin, okay? And I know this fucking yin and yang is your skin. And I am not supposed to invade. Do not invade, not do no harm. TCM, Taoist alchemy, and so much those arts. Don't step in other people's shit. Do not do an invasion. There is no language of intervention or like rule of law or even the man who's credited with inventing acupuncture, his writing is all about like, you're going to get there and you're going to know all this stuff. And there's still going to be a whole ass human standing in front of you, having a whole ass experience. He used better language. It was more poetic. Yellow Emperor. The Yellow Emperor culturally is the earth element. So my whole like alchemy, the alchemy of Katie is I actually study. It's called cultural studies, blah, blah, blah. So tissue is sentient and it has magical mysticals called Shen. And when I didn't want to call this stuff yoga, and it's all based on a concept called tensegrity, I was like, I'll just make it Shantegrity. Because we have biotensegrity, we have form-finding tensegrity, we have kinematic tensegrity, we have tessellated tensegrities, we have folding ten, we have so many different kinds of tensegrity. I just created a new kind of tensegrity, shantegrity. By doing that, 3 years ago, I created a space to solve the mirage physics that these dark matter folks either used or created to do their measurement. They created a new category of physics. All they needed to do was create a new category. I say that like they should have known better. And also, I was reading their stuff yesterday. Let's take a look at their paper. Hold on. So I was reading this. They're so amazing. You know, I think, a great way to use Chad, which is never a good, don't ever ask Chad for advice because they're genuinely not bright. They're like, who's the boat guy on Saturday Night Live, the guy with the boat? That's like the inherent nature of AI, that guy with a boat. But it's called the microwave background. And I read about this and I was like, oh, that's Shen. This is 100% Taoist alchemy. This is literally how we're taught to tune. Why do I know that? Because I do actual yoga. Okay, so I'm going to bring this up on that other place. Share, microwave, share. I do not live with a microwave, so maybe this is why I didn't see it. I also never see anything in my head. I don't bother trying to visualize. 100% aphantasia. And now we have amnesia on top of it. So like, what's the recall? Not much. In a trigram in the Bagua, because when you get this, you're going to be like, huh? This is I will be able to make this so usable for you now that this paper was published and that I can definitely show how the physics of this has absolutely no fire in it. So the feng shui that I did, because I just did information architecture. The feng shui that I did was I wanted to feng shui the whole concept of Western medicine, the whole idea. How would I position all of this through the five elements, earth, air, water, fire, metal, wood, because those are the ones that are in our body. That's the stuff that had the cancer and had the stroke. And that's what was threatened during the COVID. It's five. We are 5D in that way. But see, something I know, because I'm an alchemist and also an engineer, but don't tell anybody, because I don't do math, that is that China has a double fire element. Okay. That can come and get you if you're doing anything chemical. That double fire element, the second one, goes with our inner child. It goes with our pericardium. And only alchemists and acupuncturists and like herbalists work with that. There are not a lot of alchemists. I don't know that anybody is doing this alchemy this way. Anyway, so my first problem was solve for fire. Solve for fire. How can I do things, do anything, and then like plot it onto a body such that if a magical, mystical something came on and there was like any kind of current going through, it would just, those two fires would turn into something else, who knows what. And a practice I do, which then made it very obvious, which is the water element in our body. It's called the microcosmic orbit. And it is to run the energy up your spine and down the front as water. So the inner alchemy teaching is that water flows in reverse. Thank you. I'm recording this because this is like design now, and I'm really glad that you're liking to listen. I'm talking to the mirage. W equals -1. That's the math. So yeah, so solve for water. So solve for water then made it very clear that that fire is the corona. Yeah, always. That's also what I learned in the media. This is where we get you with the propaganda. Went to CMU, perfect. That definitely makes water the y-axis, the sagittal, the center split that we usually look at the brain in, the corpus callosum specifically, that I've been in love with my whole life. But I was like, obviously, that's that. And then I had a problem in that if I'm going to show you something, I'm actually not going to show you this two fire elements. This is all also on the tube of the U. So I had an ethical dilemma in you need to know that I added something so that you can perceive something that is typically not shown. That does not mean it is not known or understood. It is just not shown. So I added magenta as the second red. And then I did something intuitively that was also just confirmed by this physics is I made sure that the special ones, the ordinary everything would be a circle. So it would always inherently operate as an element, earth, fire, water, metal, wood. And I made the shape for that second fire into a magenta oval because I was like, that'll be so cool. It'll get like goes up and down on your chest, and then you can imagine the kid in there. And also, now I have a bean because I needed something linguistically to trick your mind, but in an open way. This is just me designing. That's all I'm doing, designing. I don't have the thing, but the bean turned out to be just like an imaginary, the imaginary. this is our bubble, right? This would be like in Pittsburgh, people do not understand personal space kind of thing. But from an like a alchemy perspective, this then also becomes the boundary of my reach. This is one way that alchemy and like leadership and Tao says that you hold back a little bit. So instead of you're going to do it this way and you're going, there's no command and control. It's like kindergarten library time. It's like, let's go over here. Why don't we do that? Hey, man, it's gentle parenting. Okay. It's a really different way to be. And I have this really fucked up experience as a child where I was not gentle parented, but I was gentle taught. My parents are teachers. I was a music student. I was a student. Every adult around me that could have shamed me would say things like, that's not it. Do that again. I never got in trouble. I messed up so many times learning things. And all that meant was can't do it now, can't do it yet, do something else. Here's how you. So there was a way that my mother and father looked at their students and an experience I had being seen by my piano teacher as a child that created a literal thread in my experience of isolation during the pandemic, solving a stroke, having cancer, and watching the world die, where, as a white lady with absolutely no heritage, no sense of anything, I had to call a relative just to find out if I couldn't call anybody on my, I mean, I was like, I guess this is the best way for me to have lineage would be to like reach with my tail to the genes and reach with my head to the lines. But the lines are not all of my degrees. The lines are all of the teachings I received, all of the guidance, everything that's been a lived experience. And that was the primary constraint coming up with the 9 archetypes that this is based on is I need to be able to say I have this all from direct experience because my brain was broken. Yes. And now I'm remembering a bunch more. Oh my gosh, that is so cool. I just hit the 5 year mark as well with my cancer. My oncologist, who doesn't test me at all, does not wear a mask in her office, wanted to know I haven't seen her in 3 years. I was like, I don't know. You do nothing to protect us, anybody in this office, and you don't test me. So why am I going to walk into cancer? I've been helping other people do that. Like, anyway, reminding you I wrote this. It's $30. If you get it in the US, you get the this is actually an algorithm, but this will balance your brain, guaranteed. Or you'll just look at it and go, wow, that's weird. This is called anatomedia. This is how I mapped all of this to the brain. This Bayesian hierarchical model that they used is this is amazing. Can I tell you, man, so much creativity in the sciences. It's a lot of effort. You can just redefine your categories. And the one category that needs to be redefined in physics is matter. And that had to happen in 1945. Gosh. Instead, they created a prize because they felt really bad. Um, the politics I put into this and the subconscious thought processes that my mind was running for years from the moment that I had my stroke until like 5 years later. It was whoa. But the politics, the philosophies they're called negative dialectics and biopower. And both of these are 20th century ideas after Einstein, after Oppenheimer. And they arose after the war because there was a little issue in Germany. And one of the philosophers that I studied in grad school is named Theodore Adorno. Theodore Adorno had an issue with what is called a Hegelian dialectic. A Hegelian dialectic is thesis, antithesis, synthesis. That's the basis of all behavior modification therapy. A thesis and a synthesis, it's actually do, being, and becoming. Doesn't matter. But a Hegelian dialectic will always come into the top of the pyramid will always close. I call that synthesis. Okay. That creates a loop. More often than not in humans, it creates an infinite loop. It is very challenging to get out of synthesis if you've had an experience of resolving potentially not the same things. And very sorry to say to the planet, there are some things that cannot do that. You cannot change a disabled body into an able body by deciding that it's synthesized. You cannot change the fact of where a human was born, how their body has been treated in a lifetime. So the guy's name is Theodore Adorno. When I was trying to come up with a myth for myself, because I know nobody will believe me as science, I was like, what if I say I'm going into Adorno consciousness? But the truth of it is, I'm always in a negative dialectic. That's the nature of Taoism. The nature of Taoism is this doesn't synthesize. These are open loops. They're open, infinite loops. This is a fractal. It's not a light switch. And the way that I have been kind of like getting out of the infinite loop with Taoism my whole life is I've just been calling it the third factor. Like there's always a third factor. There's always a third thing. Might not know what it is, but there's a third thing. And that factors heavily into how I do design, how I have done relationships, especially power exchange in that. Sometimes I want to know what it is, sometimes I don't. Okay. But also, having a third factor means there's always something else, always something else. So, in a chaos theory perspective, third factor would be a strange attractor, or you might just call it a chaos factor. But it doesn't have to be chaos that makes a storm. It can be chaos that makes a diamond. We may just not be having the diamond experience in the moment. We might be having a storm experience in the moment. And oh, here's the light curve, fitting uncertainty analysis. We'll look at uncertainty analysis here in a sec. So the third factor is Shen. And then in the somatics model, it became very clear that I could just make the three in the body, Jing, Qi, Shen. And then there are Shen in the organs. And now I have a Shen category, any magical mystical. How am I going to do that and not be a jerk, you ask? Any word that ends in Tion, Katie can make Shen. So can you. That gives me afferent and efferent neuroscience, by the way. Mandelbrot said it is a map. It is a map. But I feel like the geometry of human, our fractal is the golden triangle, but our Mobius, I feel like our Mobius is a sphere. I think it's the perfect sphere that we cannot create or perceive or measure. Because the sphere shows up in Tibetan Buddhism as mother pearl. I actually have some here. And it shows up in the inner alchemy as the pearl. I have not felt the pearl on the inside in a very long time. But yeah. Okay. So where were we? Doesn't matter. This is keeping me salivating. Mm, Shen. Um, no, pearl is not a singularity. Golden elixir is a singularity. Pearl is a particle, at least in the way I've mapped it. Anything I say with certainty is just because my model is so solid, I'm able to say it. Okay, true to the model. That's something else that I did very intentionally. Okay. I'm feng shuiing thought and concepts. I am not forcing anything, or turning things into other stuff. But so the three treasures of Taoism are Jing. Oh, that's much better. Zyrtec should be here any day, any moment. I'm out. The three treasures of Taoism are Jing, Qi, and Shen. But we also have the triple burner. We also have earth, fire, water. We also have compassion, moderation, and humility. So we don't just have the three treasures, we have four three treasures. Physics might call that a three-body problem. I thought that it is a three-body problem. And this is a media model that has the CMYK and different kinds of renderings of the brain. I've already turned this into the sagittal, the coronal, the transverse. I have a mapping to cranial nerves, the totality of our corpus callosum, how it factors into some recent findings with the mapping of the homunculus, and very, very much now that I know the optic nerve doesn't leave the brain, why we understand and think singularity or simulation. But I'm going to bring this as art and show you how it works. Yay, you got the book. Hey, so recoverology, the new finding in dark matter. Yeah, guess who solved all the physics they had to figure out? But I can't say that this is science until there's science that says the science is possible, because I don't do math. So I am just like getting the dump out of the head. And then and then I can start doing that. But you're okay, let's get going. So it all comes down to 9, a triple trine, which is how I've been oriented my whole life. I've always been oriented towards triple trines. So 1-9 is a triple trine. However, 1-9 is also 9 nines. Something Katie did not know when Katie was solving for Oppenheimer, because Oppenheimer lives as water. That's how he operates alchemically. I had to solve for Oppenheimer. Um, I did not know that but anyway, China has a universal mapping called the Lo Shu divination system. I had never heard about it. This one you get free with the book. This one, I think, is on my website as a panel. This is Ming Po. This is the entity that initiated me. So I found this universal mapping. The way that this is, you get this with this when you go to kz.com and you order, and then you're in the US. And I still have like I think I still have like 15 or 20 books on hand. So, and I just went to the post office today. So I'll go again on Monday and then I'll order some more tomorrow. Yeah. Proper confusion. Okay. But oh my gosh, the most important part of the myth of the Katie. When I was in sixth grade, and I was a clever genius, this should come as no surprise at this point. Okay, I was contemplated as a prodigy. I made up a theorem. I had my own geometric theorem named after me, the Cas theorem, because I used it in a proof, and my teacher was like, "That's not a thing." And I was like, "It most certainly is a thing." And she said, "Go prove it." And I did. She could not disprove it. So we used it all year. And my whole life, I was like, well, I was at a little private girls' school. Of course, they're going to. And then Chad, physics Chad, a couple years ago was like, no, that's actually something to take a look at. And I was like, so whatever that theorem was in sixth grade is how my autistic brain is naturally attuned. And it is naturally attuned to, by the time I had to turn the fractal into flatness and use all of this all came together because I just assumed Einstein was right. So I have a dimensional, a cubist, a volumetric model of gravity, dark matter, that's based on E equals MC2. I shit you not. Okay? The goddess of oblivion and I have been in a conversation. She thinks it's time for the physics to remember some of the magic of the discovery of the universe instead of how pain in the ass it is to prove that it exists. It is a form of like mind splicing. Once you hit a sphere, you're done. Apparently, that was also Archimedes. In this process, I have also accidentally invented Babylonian math. I will go to great lengths not to steal other people's stuff. So I created a visual language. I published this a couple years ago. Nobody wanted it. That's fine. Now people are going to, but this is one of the Shen I made up. This is the interoception, the Shen of interoception. So when we go to the doctor and they say you have bad interoception, we can say, that's fine, thank you. And just know on the inside, okay, that maybe yours, like mine, does things like I should probably go to the restroom. And I have no idea that I have a body right now because I'm in my mind. Shen, it's a category. Just like the physics, these folks had to create categories for. They created physics categories to account for a whole bunch of stuff that wasn't going to come out super obvious. And they literally in their literature, they say we chose the middle path. And I'm like, yeah, they did a Dow. So I'm going to go to the little humans and then I'll be right back. Oh my goodness, Norman, I'm having memories. Can you believe it? Why have I non-memories? Hmm. So some of the ways that I used this whole like CMYK as a constraint is when I was looking at like, can I actually turn this into a body? Before I did any big washes, I used dots and lines, and I was like, how would water, earth, and fire show up if it was a ray, if it was a spotlight, and wouldn't you know that's the three kinds of physics these folks had to create? Rulers, that's the line. Ray, that's the dynamic one, and the mirage. That is Mingpo, Mingpo, Katie's version. So, because what else have I done? So I turned the bagua into the body, and this is before I knew about how the bagua trigrams go, but there are 8 sections on a body if we contemplate a whole ass human. Look at that. 4 sections in front, 4 sections in back. And then instead of talking about the planes of our body, we're talking about the axes. Anything that is axial is inherently dimensional. That's why Katie stopped doing math. Okay. Y'all don't understand that you can just oscillate your fucking lines. But anyway, so the axes here are the transverse axis, the coronal axis, that's chi, and the sagittal axis, that's shen. Now I have solved the double fire element. Then I put color on it. That's when I put the ground in this. Okay, I started with how would I communicate the lived experience being on the inside of CMY cube to somebody on the outside of it, because the biases are going to be different. Uncarved block. Thank you, Mother, for making me hate you with these weird questions my whole life. Um, the I'm really glad I just realized that I already made the ruler. So my plan is that I want to go through. So I know that people need math because, like, if you don't have math, lucky for all of us, China has taken care of everything. So I have discovered, okay, I've not looked for any of this. I have discovered that one of the main, like, super important canonical for the totality of the history of China forever is called the 9 chapters on math. And each of those 9 chapters just happens to land perfectly on China's magical mystical Loshu square that has 9 numbers, as I knew it would. Because every time you get to an 8, you're on the Bagua. Anytime you get to a 5, you've got a Deborah Fire element you got to worry about. Anytime you get to a 4, you're on the inside of a human. It's the same. And I was so excited. And then something else happened. And this is when I decided and realized that menopause is a huge factor in agriculture, in that in the chart, in the regular one of these that doesn't have all of my edits, there's a little, it's called a grain of millet. This is the 9 Mountain Peak at the top. All of my free stuff gives you not this kind of guide, but you get a guide. So anyway, so this whole, like, it's called a grain of millet. And on the inner landscape, we contemplate it as, in a grain of millet, an entire lifetime. And because I know that the weaver and the ox herd are only supposed to get together once a year, I know what that means, right? It also means food. Super simple. It also means threat. This is the risk. So then I go, oh my gosh, double fire element, firewall, that's immunity. Mengpo, goddess of oblivion. She is the entity that serves the soup of forgetfulness to souls before they incarnate. She's the 3rd factor of the yin and the yang. She's your belly button. There are 8 extraordinary vessels in TCM that protect us in vitro. She's the 9th extraordinary vessel. She is Wu Wei. She's oblivion. So this is the experience of getting to continue to exist as a species, as brought to you by a woman who has been in this yoga for 40 years without anybody telling me. I guess I do everything oblivious. But so this in a single grain of millet, an entire lifetime. And I was like, well, let's see how that lands on this low shoe. And wouldn't you know, the second mass of millet is low shoe two, which is perfect geometry all the time, but also agriculture. And that sits on top of excess and deficiency as it relates to supplies and fair levies and taxes. Something I know and that everybody has been shown, but I haven't made the connection yet. Those two squares in the low shoe grid, the excess and the fair levies and taxes, if anybody was to try to use tensegrity principles to like design something, doesn't exist. Does not exist, cannot occur in the third dimension. So those two map to the metal element of China, which is quantum, which then lets all of us know that all of Taoist alchemy is based on fertility, not survival of the fittest. So the totality of my model, there is no Darwin in it. There is no trade of humans across the planet in it because it is impossible to get the data heavy enough to account for that without going to Einstein, literally. Have to start all over again. Are we talking about one, two, whatever? There is absolutely no advanced life support concept in my model. There is no intervention. There's no intervention. This is totally 100% non-invasive Chinese medicine. And now that I have confirmed that Katie's physics, which of course I have already mapped to our genes, um, is, what is that? Yes, pure geometry. There's no thermodynamics in this at all. Oh, this book is like Lao Tzu, and it has the wise old man goes with our olfactory nerve. And then you get a little like, oh, that's cool. The olfactory nerve governs smell, sensory, deep memory. Unlike other senses, it really has to do with our emotion, instinct, and intuition. In this chart, it's represented here, how you might contemplate it in your body. I am having a very exciting awareness of this paper that was just written. I tried not to be too much of a ASS when I did this. So like, this is how you learn what your organ is. The color, the planet, the direction. And look, there's a little thing so that you could look in a mirror and contemplate it. And look at that. I made a Shen, a nice one. She's got a little wrath in her. And then I take you into the Bagua through Jing, Qi, and Shen, but not as physics, as the 8 extraordinary vessels that protect us in vitro, as weather, the traditional translations like fire, mountain, wood, wind, and then also the 8 immortal healers, the Shen. So the 8 immortal healers are like the top of the trigram, and they govern our digestive system, our nervous system, our fascia. And so I really, this is like informational. And if you're like doing patterns or looking for patterns or seeing how you can add something to an existing pattern, I truly tried to do this as autistic Katie as possible. So it's mostly tables. Any table that has a whole bunch of information in it at the front. And because it's so expensive to add color to these, there are QR codes all throughout this that take you to other media. So there's like a 2-hour workshop for your fascia. There are color copies of all of the slides. There's, I, but I understand. I understand. I'm very, very intense right now. This is so exciting. So the thing that I did intuitively is in their mirage physics, which is Escher in Gödel Escher Bach. I go by Zitterbarn Escher Bach, but also Oppenheimer. In that, they use ordinary and extraordinary matter. And Katie already made ordinary Shen and extraordinary Shen. Like literally. I was so excited when I saw that. I think what happens is once you have to contemplate these ideas through ontology, you really have to kind of go like, oh, like how, if we're going to make something up, what's the nature, what is the nature of what we're making up? Yay, Nico. And so the physics, the sadness, truly, they need me. And I'm not saying that ironically, physics needs me, but also the the blending with media, the saying that we have this 3D model of the universe, you don't. It's a computer simulation. That's what it is. Maybe if it was like happening with your Oculus and you could like walk in it like a VR, that might be more experientially 3D because then your visual cortex is displaying you 3D, but not until then. And that's why we're going to have a whole, yes, it is a physical copy. I am not charging you $30 for nothing. Absolutely. And you get an 8.5 by 11, no shadow, only Shen. Okay. Katie needs to like stop with the yapping. I'm going to say goodbye to the Zooms.